Alright, in this video, I'm going to take a deeper look at the 14-year tribulation that I've been actually hearing about and take a look at it, dissect it a little bit. I don't quite grasp it. This is just a little bit more detail, so I'm making videos going through my progress of learning about this to see if there's anything to it. What I will say is I do see the 14 years in the scriptures, but when I get into Daniel and Revelation, I do not see the 14 years. Now, this picture here is from YouTube user Ministry Revealed, and he has this little diagram going into the first 6 seals is 7 years, and then we have the 7 trumpets, which is another 7 years. These do seem to be similar where they could overlap, the seals and the trumpets. I'm not saying they do or don't. I'm just saying it's a possibility. There's a lot of similarity between, first seal, first trumpet, second seal, second trumpet. It's like each time Jesus removes a seal, an angel can blast a trumpet. Possibility. This could be a 7-year period, and this could be a 7-year period. Except I don't see anything in Revelation giving you a time frame of how long each seal lasts and how long between each seal. So to say that it takes 7 years is just speculation as far as I can see. The same thing concerning the trumpets. Now, what we can do is we can look at the times in Revelation where it mentions the 3.5-year periods and see if those 3.5-year periods match up with the seals. They match up with the trumpets. So that if we look at the first time 3.5 years is mentioned in Revelation and see if there's a connection to the seals, then possibly we could make a connection there to be like, oh, these seals seem to be happening in this 3.5-year period, and these seals happen in this 3.5-year period, and then the trumpets in this, and the trumpets in this 3.5. So it's possible for that, but I really don't see that. I'm going to take a look at it in this video, but the first thing I want to do is just lay this foundation of how this is being laid out and how this is being taught and why. Part of what we see here, something I forgot to put up here, is concerning Noah, where he sent a raven out and it didn't come back, and he sent a dove out and it came back, and he sent I think a second time, and had to do with 2 7-day periods, which would be, I interpreted it as 7 years prophetically. So I was like, okay, I get you there, but I don't see how that represents tribulation. They're up in the ark just waiting, and the world is being destroyed by the flood. I'm not quite sure how that coincides with 14-year tribulation, especially since the time frame of the flood and the 40 days of raining, and what is it, about like a year where the flood was actually out covering the earth. So it doesn't quite connect. But when we look at some other stories, we have Leah and Rachel, and this you can see a 14-year period, because Jacob works for Laban for 7 years thinking that he's going to marry Rachel, but he ends up getting Leah. So then he works 7 more years to get Rachel. So we see 7 and 7, right? And some people will take this to be 7 years for the church, 7 years for Israel. Okay, possible there. We also see a connection when we get into Joseph, because Leah was actually fruitful. So it's like the 7 years of plenty, and Rachel was barren, so it was like the 7 years of famine. All right, so we do see a bit of a connection there. right? But at the same time, I can see how you can take these sevens differently as well. You can take the first seven representing the 7,000 years of uh, the timeline for Earth. We're coming up at the 6,000 years, and now we're going to have a millennium. It's not quite finished at 7, but then there's going to be the 7 years of famine, which represents the 7-year tribulation. Just throwing that out there. There's different ways to look at it. It can have multiple meanings. It can mean all of them or really none of them. We can just not really grasp what's being said. But we know that the church in Israel are referred to as women, and there's a connection with a covenant marriage with God. So when we see this marriage here with these women, we can see a connection to what's going on at the end of the world, because Jesus is supposed to be coming for his bride. All right, so that's why we're making this connection here. And then when we come to Joseph in Egypt, he interprets the Pharaoh's dream, and he's made second in command because he tells him that the dream represents 7 years of plenty where there's going to be abundance, but then there's going to be a 7-year famine where nothing's really growing. Right? So we got the 14, we got 7 and 7. Right? So I can see that connection here. And this seems like it could be about the end of the world, the end of time. And right before the end, there's 7 years of things going really well. And then, when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes upon them. And then you got 7 years of famine, the tribulation. So that makes some sense. I can see where you would get 14 years, except with the start of the 14 years, where is that? What's the starting point? Right? When we come to represent Joseph as Jesus, or Jesus as Joseph, we can see that the Pharaoh represents the father, Jesus second in command, the son. He actually marries an Egyptian, a Gentile woman, before the 7 years of plenty. So it seems as though there would be a rapture of the church, then there would be 7 years of plenty, and then they think, peace and safety, they forget about the rapture, and then 7 years of tribulation. Possibility, we can take a look at Daniel and Revelation to see if that could fit into that kind of timeline. Not too sure about that, but there's something being told here. And again, you can take sevens just to represent completion. They don't necessarily have to represent that period of time. But yeah. Next is that these two calves right here were born at the same time, showing sevens on their head, and people were taking a look at this. This was at 2014 and 15, and we can see this is a nice lush 7. So you take this as 7 years of plenty. Like, this is a very clear 7, right? But this one is kind of like, what? That's almost like a little check mark. But it's a 7, but not as clear as defined as the other one, right? So they would take this as the 7 years of famine. These two calves were born same place, 2014 or 2015, right around that time. So people were thinking, oh, it's just like Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream, and these things were to shortly come to pass. So shortly after the interpretation, I don't know how soon, it could have been a year, could have been 3 years, I don't know. Then all of a sudden they have 7 years of plenty. Then 7 years of famine. So who knows how long after this it was supposed to start. Not sure when that is, right? but it's definitely something to think about. So again, we can see the 2 7s, and that would be 14. The problem is that when we get into Daniel and Revelation, we do not see 7 years, yet alone 14 years. Granted, you could take 3.5 years and put them together to get 14 eventually, but to straight up show 7 or 14, we don't see. Now, in Daniel chapter 9, we do read about Daniel's 70 weeks, and a lot of people take Daniel's 70th week and say that's at the end of time, and that's the only place you find 7 or a 7-year period is Daniel's 70th week. But that whole week is not cast to the end, only half of it. Because we can see here in Daniel chapter 12, where Daniel is being told about Michael standing up, and that's pretty key. Michael standing up, because we're going to read about that in Revelation as well. And it says here that Daniel asks, when is this for? How long is this going to be? And he's told here that is for a time, times, and a half a time. A time is a year, times is a multiple of that, so that's 2 years, and a half. A half a time is a half a year, so that's 3.5 years. So he's not told that it's going to be for 7 years. He's not told that it's for 14 years. He's told for 3.5 years. There's no mention of the 3.5 years again. There's no mention of 7 years, 14 years. So at the end, we only get a mention of 3.5 years, right? And he tells them that this is sealed for the time of the end. So this 3.5 years is for the end, right? So we can see that this 14-year period or even a 7-year period isn't existent when we come to the end of Daniel and it's talking about the end of the world. We have a 3.5-year period. So that is key when we read Revelation, because we don't want to put in anything into Revelation that's not there. The foundation for Revelation and to understand Revelation and the symbols in Revelation is to use Daniel, because Daniel uses beasts and other such things to represent governments and kingdoms so that you know what's going on and what he's talking about here. So when we come to Revelation, we read about the temple being measured and that the courtyard is given over to the Gentiles for 42 months. That would be 3.5 years. And if you have a 30-day month, you would get what it says here, 1,203 score days. So you can see that while the Gentiles have the outer court, it seems as though that same length of time is when these two witnesses are going out and witnessing. Seems to be Elijah and Moses. I'm not going to say it is, it's just my guess. Looking at all the information about this, I would say it's Elijah and Moses, but I don't know. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm just pretty sure that's who it is. But like I said, this seems to be the same period of time. It's described as 42 months and 1,203 score days. That's both represents 3.5 years, right? Now, I would not say that this is two separate periods of time. I wouldn't say, oh, the Gentiles are going to tread the courtyard for 3.5 years, and then for 3.5 years, these two witnesses will prophesy, right? Now, if you see something here that would say that this represents two different 3.5-year periods, I'll hear you out. But I don't quite see anything to lead me to believe such a thing. Now, taking these two phrases, we can connect them to the other places in Revelation that it mentions 3.5 years, which would lead you to believe that it's talking about the same period of time, not a different period of time. So when it talks about the Gentiles treading the courtyard, it says 42 months. We can see in Revelation 13 that this beast that comes up out of the sea is given time to continue for 42 months. So it seems as though this beast gets the power to tread the courtyard for the 3.5 years, and that's the same time that this is going on and these two witnesses are witnessing, right, for 1,203 days. And then the other place that 3.5 years mentioned in Revelation is over here in Revelation chapter 12. And we can see that the same phrasing is used, 1,203 days. That's how long the woman flees into the wilderness to hide from the dragon, which is probably that first beast up that comes up out of the sea, right? So she's hiding for the same time that the two witnesses are witnessing, because when this beast is allowed to trample the courtyard, it's probably around the time of the abomination of desolation spoken of in Daniel, and the Jews were told that they need to flee Judea and flee into the mountains at that time. So that's why it makes sense that they fled into the wilderness. They were listening to God's word, they paid attention to what he said, and they got the hell out of Dodge, right? And this again connects to the 3.5 year periods at the end, because this is when Michael stands up. Michael stands up for the people of Israel, and he fights against the dragon, and he casts the dragon down. The dragon has but a short time. So he tries to get that woman that's fleeing into the wilderness. And notice it's the same phrasing in Daniel, times and a half of time. So we can see here, trying to put this picture together of just the time anyway, that it's a 3.5 year period, that this is the same 3.5 year period that Michael stands up here in Daniel chapter 12. It's at the end of time, and it's for a time, times and a half a time. Michael stands up, casts the dragon down, and that dragon he knows that's how much time he has, so he's trying to get the woman, but the woman is fled into the wilderness for those 3.5 years, 1,203 days. And that's when the two witnesses are doing their thing. The two witnesses doing their thing, and the beast is trampled in the courtyard. Right? So that's what it seems to be, is one 3.5 year period. Not two 3.5 year periods, and definitely not four 3.5 year periods. See, but the thing is that possibly, if we took a look at this, and the Gentiles are treading the courtyard for 3.5 years, I do not see how that connects to any of the seals or any of the trumpets. So I can't say that this 42 months here represents any of the seals. The only thing I can connect to it is this 42 months, the beast has given great authority, and the first seal, the Antichrist, comes about to conquer. So he's conquering. And that could be this, the 3.5 years he's going out and he's conquering. But he also receives a deadly wound, right? And that could be, when we come back here, he receives his deadly wound, he comes up from the dead, and that's when he, at the end of the 3.5 years, he kills the two witnesses here, as it says that they are dead and their dead bodies are seen for 3.5 days. And then they rise up, and it says right here they are taken up to heaven. So there seems to be some kind of rapture that happens 3.5 years into the tribulation here. This could be the same time the 144,000 are taken up. Not too sure about that. I guess I should make that clear that I believe that there's a pre-tribulation rapture, but there also looks like there's some kind of rapture in the middle, and then there's some kind of gleaning at the end of the rapture. So it's just like the harvest, where you have your first fruits, and then you gather up the corners and stuff you missed, and then there's a bunch of stuff that fell, and you go pick up that. So there's like 3 phases to the harvest. So people thinking that there's one rapture, that's just putting yourself in a box, right? And you got to look at the possibility that everybody's right. They're just seeing a little piece of the puzzle. Kind of like 3 blind men touching the elephant. One's touching a leg and thinks that it's a pillar. One's touching the belly thinking it's a wall. One's thinking touching the trunk thinking it's a snake. But if they put it all together, they might be able to figure out what it is. But they're all just putting together on their own and saying everybody else is wrong. But yeah. Now, there's nothing really here that I can actually connect to the seals of the trumpets, other than when it talks about the devil being cast down. It says that he's cast down and angels with him, his angels, and the angels are stars, right? He takes 1/3 of the stars of heaven down with him, right? As mentioned here. I don't remember the seals of the trumpets. It actually mentions, I think, was it the 5th trumpet, wormwood, and then about the 7th trumpet, one's cast down, or the 7th or the 6th trumpet, I don't remember which. There's a star that comes down to heaven with the key to the bottomless pit, right? So we have a wormwood star falling, and then another star falling, but it makes it seem like singular, right? It doesn't say stars fall. So you gotta pay attention to the detail, and look to see if there's any connection, but you also got to look to see what disconnects, right? That makes it show that they can't be the same thing. You got to look at both. But all in all, I am going to look more into this to see the connection between these 3.5-year periods and the seals and the trumpets, to see if there's any kind of connection where we can get an idea of when the seals are being opened and how long it takes. The same thing with the trumpets, to see if we get a time frame that they all happened in this 3.5-year period, or if there's different 3.5-year periods. And that's why it's mentioned in 3 different ways. Mentioned as 42 months, 1,203 score days, and it's mentioned as a time and dividing a time. There might be a reason why it's mentioned in 3 different ways. Could just mean 2 or 3 witnesses. I don't know. It doesn't necessarily mean it's 3 separate periods of time. Just like we have, 4 gospels. They're not each individual gospels. They're each just telling the story from their point of view, right? But anyway, that is that. Thanks for watching and take care.